Brandon, welcome to the podcast, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Josh. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I was excited to chat with you for a variety of reasons, but I want to start off for listeners that don't know who you are with a little bit about your background. So, Brandon Roman is a licensed mental health counselor and the owner of Skytop Mental Health Counseling, a private group of 9 counselors in Kingston, New York. Skytop provides counseling services to children, adolescents, and adults with a diverse range of presenting mental health concerns. Brandon provides clinical supervision and continuing education for other counselors and is an adjunct professor of counselor education at SUNY New Paltz. His 15 plus years of experience also include working in substance abuse treatment, college counseling, and wilderness therapy settings. Brandon has a personal interest in improving health through physical fitness and sees psychological health as an imperative aspect of this. So before we kick this off, I want to just set the stage here with some, concerning statistics here, and then we're dive in. So I did some research before the call, and I know that mental health is on the rise, and it's a common topic nowadays. And so, but I wanted to get some stats, and so 13% of youth ages 12 to 17 reported serious thoughts of suicide. 23% of US adults experienced a mental health illness in the past year. 1 in 5 youth had at least one major depressive episode in the past year, and over half did not receive treatment. And 18% of adults had a substance abuse disorder in the last year. So, we take empathy to that. People are struggling. I was really, really interested. You and I have got to know each other through endurance sports. But knowing your background and how you're interested in, the health and physical fitness side of it and what you do from a mental health counseling perspective led me to reaching out and wanting to have this conversation, because I think more people should be having a conversation like this. The Co-Movement Gym podcast is sponsored by Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, and A Dog's Day Out Doggy Daycare. Mention this podcast or use the promo code in the episode description for a nice discount on us. Brandon, what interested you first off in the field of mental health counseling?
Yeah. Thanks for those stats and doing the dive on it. I went to a small school not too far from where you are, and the only AP classes we had in high school, there was a couple of them, and I took interest in a psychology class, which then led me to getting a psychology degree. And I think my interest at that time was just in general. I've always been curious about what makes people click, why people are the way they are, and my perception of myself was that I may have some sensibilities that could be helpful for others in terms of helping with certain problems. And again, just a general interest in the mind, I guess, in psychology. This was now almost, 20 years ago or so. But when I discovered that you could become a licensed practicing therapist in private practice, like what I do now with a master's degree, that motivated me out of undergrad to go on to get my mental health counseling degree. And I think I've been trying to answer that question that you just asked my whole career, and I would have answered it differently in 2008 than I do now. I think in general, I'm still pretty interested in all of what I just said, but it's a real privilege of working in this profession that, psychological growth and personal growth and being introspective in that way is just baked in, and it's an imperative. So I have the fortune of every day, getting to try to help others, but in the process, thinking a lot about myself. And, that ties well into all the other things that you and I like to talk about in the physical health realm.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think when you talk about someone having a passion, having a self-interest in it personally also helps professionally. I own a coaching business, and I love fitness, and I personally love to be coached. Like, you've helped me a lot. And so, I think I was talking to someone yesterday, and I said, I don't feel like I have a job. It's just sort of what I do. Right. And so that's sort of what you're describing. Like, you're really interested in it, personally, and then also professionally. So that helps. Brandon, why do you think the mental health conditions are on the rise in today's society?
Yeah, I have lots of ideas, and I don't know that I'll have an answer, but just to back up and even try to reframe a little bit of what we're talking about in those statistics, I'll put a twist on it. There may be something that's worth seeing as a positive in all of this that we're talking about. Again, in my time in this field, the stigma around even talking about mental health, acknowledging that it exists, the stigma has been reducing and awareness
Mhm.
of it is on the rise. And whenever that's the case, all of a sudden things are going to appear much more prevalent. And that's not to say that they actually are simultaneously, but I don't think a lot of conversations like this were happening. And certainly we didn't live in a digital connected world 20 or 30 years ago. So what we are seeing and knowing as a rise in mental health conditions, which is in fact the case, is partially explained by simply we're more willing to talk about it, more people are seeking treatment for it, and therefore it's going to show up in more places. And there's a part of that that I would say, as someone in this field, is actually a good thing. But that aside, like we could probably jump to a lot of obvious concerns. We're living in a more disconnected, relationally distant world. People are lonely, and in general, there's just a lot of people where life is really hard. Socioeconomics are challenging. All the health concerns that are also on the rise affect people's mental health. Uh, Again, there's just a large group of people that wake up every day and have it a lot harder than certainly I do and a lot of other people do. And when that's the case, when every day is a struggle for a lot of different reasons, um, mental health issues and diagnoses and statistics like you just named are also going to rise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Brandon, in terms of, we're having more conversations about it. So it's popping up more.
Yeah,
So there's a quote unquote rise, right? Because
yeah.
we're just more aware. So yeah, for sure. Our ancestors definitely struggled, I'm sure, with mental health issues too, right? So
They did, but they weren't, seeking therapists, or weren't,
yeah.
ads for, mental health platforms popping into their Instagram and on Spotify everywhere. So it's just our sort of consciousness of it has really changed.
Yeah. I'm interested with if a client is or an individual struggling with mental health concerns or issues, do you think that the world of like medication is in some instances overprescribed without looking at the root cause?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably every answer I give is going to be kind of a shade of gray, right? That's part of working in this field and something I like about it. There'll be a lot of yes and. So,
Mhm.
yes, I do. I think, when somebody is, let's just say, depressed or anxious, those are two really common presenting problems, and they go to their doctor, their primary care doctor, and that is just a very small part of what might come up. It's very easy to then prescribe an antidepressant or a pretty standard, psychotropic medication to try to help with that. And in general, medications can be effective and they can be helpful, but they are not the end all be all, certainly. And there's so much more that can and should be supplementing that. So medications work really well when they're paired with mental health counseling or therapy, when they're paired with all the other things that I'm sure we'll talk to today, all the lifestyle changes. And for some people, they're absolutely essential. But as a standalone, I think they can really fall short.
What percentage do you think, and I'm sure you don't have a stat on this necessarily, but in your opinion, like if 100 people are prescribed a prescription drug, what percentage are given uh additional advice to improving their situation without drugs? Do you know what I'm saying with that? Like, are they getting the slip for the prescription drug and hey, try these three things to help better your life? What percentage do you think are actually getting good advice?
probably a small percentage if those medications are being prescribed in a primary care setting.
Yeah,
Again, a general practitioner, a nurse practitioner, I can sympathize with that they have so much to cover in such a
sure,
small amount of time. So for one, to even ask them to be the prescriber, I think is often a reach, and their comfort and knowledge is going to vary, much like if they were given nutritional advice.
sure.
They just don't have that that as a resource, and sometimes is even a background. If the prescriber is a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner or somebody that's working in a setting that has mental health counselors, therapists, psychologists under the same roof, then more likely that's going to be something that's integrated into their care. And it's just probably very clear that that would be preferable. But the point of entry for so many people when it comes to medications, because there's a shortage of psychiatric providers, the point of entry is often going to be in primary care.
Are those primary care doctors, are they referring like to professionals like you? So if someone has a prescription to help address their issue, are they also saying to them like, look, I highly recommend you speak with Brandon Roman at this facility? Or are they just leaving with pills and no plan? Are they getting those referrals?
Yeah, they are. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that I trust that that is part of those meetings and those prescriptions. But the ability to track follow through and,
Sure.
again, have any collaboration or coordination, that's where it becomes really difficult. And obviously, some are going to do a better job at that than others.
Yeah, and that's similar in our field too. If someone goes to their primary care and they need to lose 40 pounds and they say, hey, you should go to Coach Josh, what percentage follow up and whatnot. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's only people can take the advice or not, right?
Josh, mental health or psychiatry, it's a specialty. So you can think
Yep.
about, we've all had those kind of annual visits with a doctor, and, they cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time.
Yeah,
And then inevitably you leave with two or three, referrals to potentially follow up with,
sure.
and psychiatry is a specialty of medicine. So if a primary doctor is prescribing, one is that if it is a complicated case, or if somebody has been on a medication long term, they should probably be referred to a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse, because that's a specialty at that point.
Yep.
And with that, again, counseling is often recommended with that.
Yeah, good. That's really good to hear. Um, let's talk about. I'm really. This is just me. I'm really curious on your thoughts on this, but like with substance abuse, let's use alcohol for example. When does occasional use cross the threshold into substance abuse? Because I think I just see a lot of this, whether it's with clients through the years or just friends and this and that. And it's
Mhm.
such a social thing now to just drink sort of a lot frequently, but you're not coined an alcoholic with a problem because you have a job and you don't beat your wife. But like the CDC, which, some of their stuff may be, accurate or not, depending on who you are, but they classify heavy drinking as 7 or more drinks a week for women and 14 or more for men. Um, like what's your opinion on that? Like, what is substance abuse? Like, how do you cross that threshold?
Yeah. Well, in our field, or in mental health, or psychological health, we follow the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which has an outline of the actual what qualifies for a diagnosis of a substance use disorder. And it's on a continuum from severe to mild, but anybody can look that up and get a sense for themselves. What I'll say is that I think we do a good job of understanding what true substance dependence is, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
what you were just describing. When somebody has a difficulty stopping or cutting back, when they're having withdrawal symptoms, when their life is
Yes.
becoming unmanageable, that jumps out, and that's obvious. But
Yes.
what is much more subtle is kind of high risk drinking with some consequences. built in. I mean, this could be applied to really any substance. So for me, what I'm often looking for and talking about with my clients is where does or to what degree does one's use impact their functioning across the domains of their life specifically. So for an adolescent, if they're using substances or drinking, I'm thinking about, is it affecting their academics, their ability to do what they need to do in school? Are they getting kicked off of sports teams? Is it causing problems at home with their parents? Are problems with their peers? That would be specific for an adolescent. With an adult, that's going to look similarly, but applied to, does it interfere with job performance? Are you showing up Monday with a hangover? Are people concerned about you? I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
is where it gets really subtle and where it's
Mm-hmm.
subjective. But if you're drinking or using a substance and the people around you who care about you are raising their eyebrows in care and concern, then that should signal that something has gone a little bit beyond kind of casual or recreational use. But what is really hard is that can fly under the radar for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And unless there is a crisis or an incident, that is something that people sort of can obviously manage. And for a lot of people, that's totally fine, but it can also go untreated for a long time.
Yeah, and you can also see, or I can, like, um, the amount for individuals growing over time, right? Like you start out with, weekend celebration. That's cool. We all do it. It's awesome. But then it's like, well, hard day at work. I'll have one, and then hard day at work, I have two, and
Mhm.
then, oh, it's Thursday, I deserve three, and then a six pack on Saturday, right? And it just sort of like, and I see this. So it's again, like, is the job suffering, or being a parent or whatnot? In many cases, no. You could argue that, right, sort of from a performance standpoint, maybe, but like, so it's just an interesting piece, because we see a lot of like food journals, and we have these intake forms, and it's that 1 to 3 a night that is sort of concerning, plus 1 or 2 days on the weekend with football. That's that next notch, and you combine all that and you do some math, and it's like 25 drinks a week, and it's like
Right.
you're on the surface, you're doing everything right. You have your job, you have married, this and that, and but I don't know, is 25 drinks a week a problem? I'm not sure.
It, it
I don't have
certainly
the answer to that, but
Yeah, it certainly seems like there's a shift happening where there's an understanding that, whereas what you just described may have sort of fallen below the threshold or
yes,
fallen underneath everybody's radar, whatever, 10 or 15 years ago, we're just starting to better understand that you know use like that, it holds people back and holds back certainly their physical health goals, but
yes,
also it affects their mental health as well. There's a
yes,
lot of downstream effects that we'll talk about and will overlap in terms of sleep or metabolic health and just general functioning. It's hard to do an honest appraisal uh, of someone or yourself if you're using even in a slight way and say that this is enhancing my life or enhancing my wellness. It's most likely subtracting, and the question is just to what degree, and is
yes.
that acceptable, and is that okay? And for, again, I'm not vilifying it. For a lot of people it is, but there are some that can get normed into their life, and you spread that out over 10, 15, 20 years, and it really does take a toll.
Yeah, I see, I see so many people go without it after they did, let's say the example I just gave, and their lives are better. Like, and I'm not anti, alcohol, but we see people lose 40 pounds in 8 weeks. It's like and they just feel so much better, and their optimism on life, and there's just a lot more life there. So I don't know if there's anything resonating with listeners, and you fall maybe into that camp. I think testing the other side, a little bit, you may see that it maybe did affect you more than you think.
For
Um,
sure. And once
so
I know I can speak for myself. I used to drink a lot more in my 20s or early 30s, and since getting into endurance sports, that has just tapered off
yeah,
to the extent that you know now when I do, I feel so bad. It sort of has a reverse effect, and it's enough reinforcement in and of itself.
yeah. Yeah, you and I are similar with that. But I feel like even if you're not into the fitness side of it, I think that when you fill the void of having to feel good or want to feel good, you don't induce things that make you feel bad, right? So I don't know
Yeah,
what it is. Maybe you're a musician or I don't know, but you can't be sort of not functioning fully for you and I, when we train, 5, 6 days a week, even if we're at 90%, that's not optimal, right? We want to feel
right,
100%. So we don't have the 2 or 3 drinks 2, 3 times a week or whatever. So, but I really think physically and or mentally filling that void that requires something for you to present fully 100%, it's an exchange of values, right? Like this person may value 25 drinks a week in the social life, but if you switch that over, and I think I've seen this in, I don't know if it's AA or like books I've read, but like when you change that addiction over to something else, essentially, right?
right,
It's it then things start to really click for people. But if you don't have the void to fill, just telling someone to sort of stop, or in our situation, like eat better, it doesn't resonate. But when a parent comes to us and they say, my kid's on the ski team and I can't get to the top of the ski hill because I need to lose 50 pounds and my knees are killing me. Now that's the interest
right.
to eat better and to exercise and whatnot. But if it's just for because I should, it's a lot of times that change doesn't occur.
Right. To put that in some counseling language, we use this framework called the stages of change model, which would
Mhm.
apply really well to what you're saying. And that's sort of an understanding that change happens across this continuum where people move from basically being in denial, which is what we call pre contemplative, to a place of ambivalence, seeing that they want to make a change, but also are kind of stuck and don't want to, a very normal place, to then eventually moving into a preparation or an action phase towards making a change. And, when it comes to any sort of behavioral change, just sort of giving the advice we know doesn't land. What you're
Mm-mm.
speaking to is true, that the work, and it shows up in counseling, is helping to really highlight the discrepancies between their values and their actions. So when somebody wants to feel better mentally and physically, when they care about a pursuit of a sports team or improving a relationship, but what they're doing on the weekends or the evenings is in direct contrast to that, that discrepancy or that point of tension is where the focus should be in terms of conversation. And the focus on the values, the prevailing values, is what ultimately helps people move towards making changes for themselves.
Mhm.
But assessing someone's readiness or that stage of change is an important part about kind of what kind of conversation or intervention to use.
Mhm. Mhm. When talking about change, do you see like peer groups being a big part of people's positive or negative, change?
Absolutely. I mean, who you surround yourself with is
Yeah.
going to have a really big influence. And, I think it's safe to say that people are either going to help sort of bring you up or help you rise, or at times feel like anchors. So,
Mhm.
that can be a really hard part about making a change, because that's not an indictment on any person or any, relationship or one's character, but it can hold somebody back from kind of tipping that stage of ambivalence that I was saying.
Do you make those recommendations in your setting, like, show me your friends and I'll show you your future type thing, or is that like it doesn't really resonate?
My approach is rarely to specifically say you need to do this or make a recommendation, but more
Mhm.
so to try to have conversations where the person is arriving at that themselves and coming
Sure.
to those realizations, and then kind of steering them towards what intuitively is probably the right thing for them to do.
I see. I
That's
see.
going to go further than
Yes.
me making some obvious claim during a first session that they already know deep down But again, this process of change, it's a lot more complicated than that. I'm sure you see
Yeah.
it in your work as well.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, we can't come in day one and say stop eating sugar.
Yeah.
Like, we have to get
Yeah.
to sort of some of the
And
root
there are people who, when we meet them for the first time, are ready, and they're already in that preparation or action phase.
Yeah,
And for them, that might be appropriate. But I find that most people usually have been struggling with something for a long time. It takes a long time to get to the point where they're asking for help or they want to have the conversations. And the last thing that I want to do is be hasty and say or do something that's going to uh, just sort of reinforce any sort of shame or sense of failure. I think sometimes patience is the right pursuit in that regards.
yeah, that's a great point, Brandon. Native Path has been a podcast sponsor of ours since day one, and it's because our clients feel amazing using their supplements. While a lot of products on the market today contain useless fillers and incorrect dosages, Native Path holds to a higher standard. Native Path's ingredients are sourced from only the highest quality, properly combined nutrients, all while being offered at competitive prices. Use code COMO15, that's COMO 15 at checkout, and receive 15% off each order. Lombardi Chiropractic has been Co-Movement's trusted chiropractor for the last 14 years. They have worked with hundreds of our clients, and I can confidently say they have the most knowledgeable and holistic approach to care that I have ever seen. Whether you suffer from migraines, low energy, nagging pain, or just simply want to improve your overall health, I highly recommend contacting the team at Lombardi Chiropractic. Mention the Co-Movement Gym podcast and receive 50% off your initial consultation and x-rays. Here at Co-Movement, we put a lot of energy into helping you become happy, healthy, and strong. But we're not the only ones needing a good workout. That's why a dog's day out is the best place in Central New York for your pet to spend their day. Your dog will be as happy and healthy as you when you let them run, play, and socialize instead of just sitting on the couch waiting for you to come home. Give your dog the active day out that they deserve. Mention this podcast and get a free day of doggy daycare at a dog's day out. Um, Marijuana has been legalized in a lot of areas. I was just in New York City for 3 days and feel like every block I went on was like, just a lot of marijuana smell. And what are you seeing on your end from like a therapy or a mental health counseling world? Like, are you working with people that want to reduce use, or are you seeing it affect people negatively, positively? I know there are positive instances too, from a medical perspective for sure. But what's going on in your world?
Yeah, my view on it is that, again, thinking back of where I started in this field, assessing someone's substance use, including marijuana use, 15 years ago, it was very much part of a substance abuse assessment. And now it shows up in our intake process almost everywhere. And I almost see it as more of just sort of people classifying it in their general health. And I think with the legalization, what ends up happening, in my opinion, is that the perception of it being harmful goes down because
Yep.
it's available, it's recreational. There aren't the legal risks that there used to be. And when perception of harm for a substance decreases, we know that use is going to increase. And so
Yes.
that's been happening for really a long time. And then, these last couple of years, I believe it's happened even more. So yeah, we have a lot of people that come in and they wouldn't identify it as an area of concern or a presenting problem per se, but we know that it is going on and potentially contributing to the mental health presenting problem that they have.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I know in our setting, it I have seen it directly lead to in many instances like lack of motivation, right?
Sure.
So like it, client says they want to create this positive change, a job change or, whatever, health goal, but when you're high 1 to 5 times a day, um, it's an inhibitor in terms of motivation. And so,
Surely.
that's a big thing I've seen, and I'm interested in that, because they're obviously getting some benefit from it, right? Or else they wouldn't do it. So I don't know what those answers are, but I see it on my end as a definitely a motivation inhibitor. Um, and that's
Surely.
frustrating because, I'm like weirdly alpha driven with goals and whatnot. And trust me, I have things I'm working on too. But it's I see it could be a simple fix. Now we have seen clients remove the use. And I can tell you, Brandon, over a 12-month period, their life dramatically improves. And I'm not saying, recreationally at a party, whatever here. I'm saying like daily use, like multiple times, and then person goes to like not using it. Their life gets better
Yeah.
in almost all circumstances. So any opinion on that or things you've seen?
Yeah, what I'm also usually tuned into is if someone is, whether it be alcohol or cannabis or any substance, if they're using it regularly, uh, you're right. It has some purpose, right? Like, why do people use any drugs? It's because they work, they feel good, and they work on some level. But in working, they're also getting in the way of learning or developing other ways of
Yes.
coping with stress,
Yes.
adjusting well-being, regulating their body or their nervous system. So while it might be seen as a tool to feel better, uh, what I would be cautious about is it becoming the only tool or the biggest tool that when you're having a hard day, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling dysregulated, that becomes the sort of the easiest path to go to, as opposed to having a menu of options that you feel like you can
Mm.
choose from as an individual. So, building and fostering other coping skills, again, it's something that a lot of counselors would really emphasize.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that's yeah, I can see people feeling limited in their options if they are really used to using a substance to help them feel better. But if you can provide, or us as coaches provide, like, hey, when you feel this, go for a 2-mile walk or run, or do 20 push-ups, or I don't know. I'm just stating it
Right.
for my world, but like giving them a menu to choose from, that has to sort of be liberating in some sense.
It is, but think about it. That's a hard sell, right?
Mhm.
Because doing everything you just named or anything I could come up with, it is it's not going to feel as good and it's not going to work as well at
That's true.
first, right? So
Yeah.
you're essentially asking somebody to remove something that serves a purpose and layer in something else that has better long-term, benefits. So again, to be patient in understanding that that is probably not going to happen overnight, but it's clearly a good path to go down is really important in all that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rewiring of the brain that happens in
Yeah.
there, and what you're speaking to, we're finding different ways to experience satisfaction, joy, have fun. Essentially releasing dopamine,
Mhm.
and they're not going to do it as well as drugs and alcohol often will, especially at first. But over the long run, that can be a deeply rewarding process.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, so I visited a major university a few weeks ago, and um, it was, I went to college. I graduated in 2005, so a little time ago. But I can tell you that, and I don't know how much you're on. Well, yeah, you're adjunct professor,
Mhm.
but like I was really surprised at the amount of mental health modalities and safe zones and multiple different strategies at play, like a lot of them. This
Mhm.
is like a really legit school. And so, like, I don't think this is a bad thing. But what it showed me was that there's a demand for those services. And maybe it's
Yes.
because of what you started the conversation off with, as far as we're just more aware of it, and more kids are requiring more stuff, and maybe it's not as much of something on the rise at these schools. And I'm not sure, but like, what's your opinion on mental health on these college campuses?
Yeah, university settings, college mental health, similarly has undergone a pretty big change in the landscape probably over the last 20 years or so. again, right around the time that I entered the field. So I can't really speak too much to what was happening before, but having worked in college counseling centers, I think 15 or 20 years ago, a college counseling center might have been one or two counselors offering some level of, actual counsel with a lot of career academic focus advice. But now the demand for legitimate mental health services on a college campus has consistently been rising, continuously. So college counseling and psychological centers are growing. They're staffed more with licensed therapists and mental health professionals, as well as psychiatrists and nurse practitioners prescribing medications to deal with the demand that you're talking about. And one of the trends that that we notice is that students are arriving at college their freshman year with long psychiatric histories, often having been in therapy for many years, already prescribed medications, and sometimes some pretty complex clinical cases that are landing in college counseling offices and on college campuses on sort of day one of freshman year. And that puts a certain strain on residents' life, certainly on academic, on professors, because it shows up everywhere. So I think part of what you're seeing is a response to that, and a bit of it figuring it out as colleges go. I don't make those decisions on that level, but I imagine it's a tightrope between offering really comprehensive, supportive student services. So wellness is a part of their life, while also not coddling or enabling students to then have to leave college and enter the world unprepared for how hard that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I've listened to that's a good point. I've listened to podcasts on that. Like there was a book also, The Coddling of the American Mind. And there is a fine balance there, right? Like students should have access to the services that keep them moving forward in life. But then also it's like, man, if you're just if you think life is just being surrounded by puppies all the time, then when you get into the real world, in many cases they don't care about that nearly as much. And so, yeah, it's, yeah, I don't have an answer to that really, or much more of an opinion. I don't know. I'm sure every situation is highly unique. But yeah, I think too much of that will lead to, let's take, you said the person the first day at college comes in with this history. Now imagine that is now their first day of work. And
It's
it's
not going to work.
yeah, well, I don't know. Like some of these places you're going above and beyond, but yeah, in many cases, it's not going to work, or it's just going to cause a giant strain. So at some point, and this will be the second half of our conversation, I think really a push on solutions. um, at some point needs to turn the tide, right? It's like obesity, and I think 74% of Americans are either overweight or obese right now. It's like, well, we could give them all Ozempic and just say there isn't a problem, or we can address more of the root cause and provide viable solutions. And so yeah. All right. So knowing that recovery is the ultimate goal for clients who have a mental health or substance abuse disorder, what daily habits, Brandon, have you have had the biggest impact on healing some of your clients?
Mm-hmm. We could probably both talk about this from the work that we do and answer the question really similarly. Uh, I'll sort of lay out the analogy of building a house. I think foundationally, from a daily habit or lifestyle change standpoint, it's hard to imagine that anybody wouldn't feel an improvement in their mental health if they weren't sleeping better, eating a healthier, more nutritious diet, and moving or exercising more, right? And that's going to show up a lot of places. Those are really foundational lifestyle changes that if anybody wanted to feel better, I'd say try these things. Again, willingness to that put aside, I think those are really effective. And so you pair what you do perhaps with what you don't do, which may be even more important in this conversation, in terms of removing certain things from one's life. If you want to, go 20 or 30 days without some of those drugs and alcohol that we talked about, and again, abstaining from certain certain behaviors or certain foods or whatever it is that intuitively aren't healthy for you. Those are going to be great starting blocks. But if that's the foundation, I think the framing of the house would be then layering in supports and skills, supportive people, relationships, being part of communities where there's like-minded, like you were saying before, people pulling you in the right direction and really looking out for your best interest. You know, harnessing those relationships, I think, is huge for people and really helpful. And then along the way, learning better skills for living, learning better ways to cope with stress, deal with conflict, communicate through problems, handle hard situations at school or work. That's really essential.
Mhm.
It's a place where counseling can certainly help.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. And for sure I can see that helping people. Do you have an again, I'm just speaking from,
Mhm.
being in the trenches in my field, that people lack a sense of hope in life, like, because really hope sort of is all we have, right? In our
Mhm.
day-to-day pursuits, like, but do you see people lacking hope, like, um that they can have a good life or a bigger life, a better vision, because there's all of us have day to day, like, it ebbs and flows, right? Like some days I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna change the world and whatever, and then there's other days where I'm like, I suck. And so do you see a lack of hope in your setting a lot of times?
I do. I think that goes back to what we were saying really early on. It's hard out there for a lot of people, and I think it's really understandable and valid for people to look out at their lives and look out at the world and feel pretty bleak about it. I
Yeah.
don't think that our access to information and technology doesn't usually help with that. And it is legitimately harder, again, socioeconomically, financially. The outlook for a lot of people, either entering adulthood, for a lot of adults entering retirement, when the outlook isn't good, I think that really affects their sense of hope and despair sometimes, and that's a really hard thing to be witness of for people.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question is because I speak with, quite a few kids like 18 to 30. And
Hmm.
I can tell you, like, when I got out of school, college, I was like pretty amped up. I'm like, I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to set up a retirement fund. I'm going to, like, I'm just like the American dream, right? Like, I'm like, bah, bah, bah.
Yeah,
And now they're like, I'll never buy a house. Can't afford it. Um, cool with staying at home with my parents till I'm
yeah,
31.
yeah,
They're just like at peace with not having hope. And, here you have me, and I'm just like,
yes,
but again, I don't, I'm not coming from that same perspective, right? So there's a tremendous amount of empathy and understanding there, but like, um, when you don't have that hope, it's like, why should I eat healthy?
right.
Why should I save $50 a week for my IRA? Fuck it, you
What's the
know?
point?
Yep,
Right. And obviously,
totally.
there's going to be people who are resourced, and I mean that on both an internal level, like have the personal, internal psychological resources, as well as resourced externally,
Hmm.
supportive family and friends, financial resources that is going to allow them to sort of see through that minefield in front of them and
Hmm.
just progress naturally. But a lot of people don't have that on both
Yeah.
internal and external levels, and that's kind of what you're describing. And so that sense of hopelessness, or what's the point, why bother putting $50 a
Yeah.
month into an IRA when I can't pay my rent, and
Yep.
that's not going to be even around or useful to me in 40 years. Again, those are hard sells to make, and I can understand that.
Yeah. I we need to find a way to give more people more hope.
Hmm.
I was talking with a school, I'll just call them a counselor. It's something in a field similar to yours. And they work with high school kids.
Hmm.
It wasn't on the podcast, it was just a private conversation. But yeah, they were saying that this particular example was a very poor community, and so like they see the poverty and their
Mm-hmm.
upbringing, and their big audacious goal may be that, like what they had. They don't have hope or a vision of like grander experiences. And so part of this counselor's strategy, which I thought was brilliant, was to expose them to things bigger, than their day to day, right? Whether it's a travel trip or a speaker or a mentor, I don't know, there's lots of examples, but, what's your opinion on that kind of strategy for bringing more hope to more people?
Yeah, man, it sounds great, and if it can impact people, then that's a wonderful intervention. I mean, being creative. There's an element of community. Again, what you're describing is exposing people to what's out there and kind of opening up that their vision on that. I could see how that would be helpful.
Yeah. Let's talk about wilderness therapy. This was interesting to me. I don't know anything about it. Uh, but I looked up a stat here, and it said over half of American adults report spending less than 5 hours a week outside. You and I know and both enjoy, we do a lot of our training outside. Um, and just the benefits of that. There's so much research now showing the benefits of being outside in nature. So what is
Mhm.
wilderness therapy, and how have you worked with that?
Yeah, so wilderness therapy is actually a modality or a setting, a counseling setting. I worked in a program years ago where usually at risk youth, but sometimes this extends into young adulthood, um, enter a wilderness program, live in small groups, and by living in nature and having to live together in that group under the supervision of staff and clinical support. That's basically where they receive their treatment. And in the process, they build a whole bunch of confidence in themselves. They learn things. They learn what they're capable of that they would have never believed that they could. They do some hard, just to put it in layman's terms, they do some hard stuff every
Mm-hmm.
day. And it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to not feel good about yourself at the end of the day when you're doing that. And that paired with a social milieu that's healthy and supportive, others going through the same thing, and counseling and support staff that's there to provide a level of supervision, it could be a pretty powerful intervention for people.
Are these camps they go to, like 1 week type camps, what you're describing?
You know, they're often longer than that. They're more like intensive treatment programs. The one
Oh
that I
wow.
worked at, the average length of stay was 55 or 60 days, but
Wow.
that would probably be more in a range from 30 to 90 days in that intensive wilderness therapy setting. And a lot of the programs, they're few and far between at this point in the Northeast. A lot of them are out west.
Mhm. What are the outcomes? They do their 55 days. Like, what have you seen for positive or negative outcomes?
Yeah, we saw a lot of good outcomes, at least short term. Again, a lot of change happened within the program. But what happens when people leave, and this is the same for any intensive intervention, the environment being so structured and supportive can facilitate a lot of change in a small amount of time. If then you return to life as it was, and
Yeah.
those changes aren't brought with you, and the environment around you doesn't change, that can unravel pretty quickly. So a lot depends on that.
Yeah, it depends. It's like the show Biggest Loser, right? Like
Right.
you remember that. I think it was
Yes.
like 90% or more. They gained all the
Right.
weight back. you know, um, their
Exactly.
environment changes. They go back to the same relationship, same habits, same patterns. And of course, they start reversing back.
And just to tie that in with what we were talking about before, that is often the challenge for someone who rises to a level of substance dependency that they do get intensive treatment, what I would call inpatient or what might be known as rehab. They can go and get sober, get support, make some changes over a 2 week period, but then are tasked with returning to their old environment. And that's where it gets really difficult, and
Yeah.
ongoing support is really needed to make those changes last.
Yeah, for sure. Have you seen the rehab center, the Padrigano in Italy? Have you heard about that,
Mhm.
Brandon?
No, it sounds
So,
lovely.
yeah, well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. there brought it to, well, my attention. It was on a podcast he did. And I researched it. And I actually interviewed on the podcast
You good?
two of the head people there in Italy. It was a fabulous conversation. And they are one of the best rehab centers in the world for substance abuse, primarily. And it is I think if I remember correctly, it was a 2 year commitment. Like
Wow.
you live there full time. You have no your limited communication with your current relationships and peer group, and they learn skills. They have a job. Like it's a farm. They do a lot of like, growing vegetables and manual labor, and it's phenomenal results. And so good that a lot of the quote unquote graduates work there
Mm,
afterwards, is like
believe it.
employees and counselors, and like, but it's a 2 year time period. It's not 55 days. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that is of interest of you at all. I could connect you, but that was, now they have duplicated the model here in the States also. They did send me a list, and it's funny, on YouTube, I had quite a few people, or I'll say a handful, reach out asking for the list, for people that they knew. But yeah, it was a fascinating program.
Yeah, that sounds great. And what it's doing among, I'm sure, a lot of other things is giving people and giving their brains time to actually change.
Yeah.
There's a lot of neuropsych changes that have to happen when, particularly with addiction, but with all mental health. And when you have 2 years for those changes to get set in motion, that's a wonderful opportunity. I'm sure that not everybody has.
Yeah, there was definitely, we went through like the layers of change, and it was obviously much slower, right, than say a camp or an intensive. But they really, 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 and you would appreciate this. I didn't know they would answer this particular question this way, but the first step was like a
Mm-hmm.
detox off shit food and technology, and they have daily exercise. Like, that was their major foundation, was that. And the two people on the interview had said, without that in place, they said future outcomes in our experience
Right.
are not as good. Like, we just need to spend a lot of time on that bottom section of that pyramid. And
Absolutely.
that was the core component. Sleep, they had like specific times they had to be in bed, and then they got up at certain times, and it was the same every day. Like, it's very regimented. It wasn't like, it's not military boot camp, but it's probably a step below that. But it rewired the participant's brain.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So let's see. For someone listening that may be struggling with a mental health concern, like primary advice, like what advice do you have for them? They're listening to this and they're like, wow, a lot of what they said is sort of where I am. Any advice or blanket advice, general advice?
Well, just to speak to what you're saying, there probably are a lot of people who would be listening that maybe wouldn't otherwise identify as feeling depressed or anxious or having any sort of mental health concerns, or at least want to do that openly. So I think it's important to that you're just making a space for that in general. If I could wave a magic wand, what I would want for everybody is to be able to have a mental health checkup in the same way that they do a physical health checkup on an annual or twice annual basis. And again, that happens in a very brief or short way in primary care, but it's not comprehensive at all. And it's often on the individual to bring those concerns in order for it to get recognized, let alone get treated. So I would say to anybody, if you think that this is kind of landing on you, to give yourself a checkup of sorts. And there's a lot of screening tools that are available for free online where you could screen yourself for depression, anxiety, everything under the sun, history of trauma. And, my asterisk on that is that, people often do that and then they can run away with labels. Those are simple screenings to kind of validate or give an idea of, does this need further attention? And I can share these resources with you after the fact. But if somebody were to screen in for anything that I just named, I think pursuing some support or potentially some help it's hard for me to imagine that that's going to be a bad thing. Again, I'm going into this trying to not say, well, just go to therapy for everybody out there. I don't think that's the only spoke on the wheel that can make a difference. But for somebody who is one of those statistics that you mentioned earlier, I think getting counseling or professional mental health help would be helpful. And I just
Mhm.
I'll use this as an opportunity to also expand, at the risk of it sounding like a PSA. Um, I'm not just referring to serious and persistent mental illness, somebody who's schizophrenic or bipolar or, really struggling, in a psychiatric way. The majority of my clients are people like you and I, my friends, my family members that are functional and healthy and have vibrant lives, but also are struggling in some way.
Sure.
And that's where therapy can be just a platform for personal growth. And
Yes.
so if you're listening and saying, well, I don't have a major problem, I would say that, we are all, if we're living and breathing, we have a task to hopefully better ourselves and try to pursue a best version of ourselves. And if therapy can be a way that it can be helpful for somebody to move towards that, then of course I'm gonna recommend that for everybody. And it's been profoundly helpful for me in my life. So I know the benefits of having somebody to talk to and just trying to be a better human being.
Yeah. Do you does your company do remote counseling or no?
Yes, we do. We do uh, probably a pretty good split down the middle of in-person appointments as well as New York. We're all licensed in New York State, so we can see clients that are residing physically anywhere in New York. And since the pandemic, the rise of telehealth services has really changed the landscape of therapists. So access to therapy via remote is, it's really incredible. I often think it's better done in person. That's the way it was designed, and there's a relational benefit to that.
Sure.
But that doesn't have to be a barrier anymore for people. And for a lot of people, being able to do something over Zoom makes it possible. So that's ultimately a good thing.
Sure. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I'm really happy, yeah, that you're doing that
Yeah.
with remote clients too. Um, so, um, so if clients are interested in learning more about your company, what's the website or contact info they can reach out?
Sure. The best way to look at what we do or contact me would be to go to skytopmhc.com. That's our website. My email address is roman@skytopmhc.com, and it's all there and easy to find. You can Google that or Google my name. It'll show up, and feel welcome to reach out to me.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, and we'll put that in the show description too. So Brendan, thanks for this awesome conversation. We'll definitely have you back on again and good luck with your future training and we'll talk soon, okay?
Appreciate it, Josh. Good to talk with you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our sponsors, Native Path Supplements, Lombardi Chiropractic, and A Dog's Day Out Doggy Daycare. They help us bring you 2 new episodes each month and have a special discount just for our listeners. See the show notes for more details. Thank you, and see you next time on the Co Movement Gym podcast.